Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Modern Engineers. Today's going to be a weird little episode. It's going to be more of me talking you through setting up your own shipyard. So, just going to go ahead and just kind of get started on kind of some tips and how you go about starting your very own shipyard and some of the buildings I have around here. So, I'm just going to preface you and let you know I run off of modern engineers concept, which means that I run industrial overhaul, areas at war, a lot of mods. I mean, that's how I get some of these roads and stuff like that. I'm working on a mod compilation just to kind of put it all together and let you know what's in here. But there are some things that are not realistic, and I'm working on getting better at that, but that's going to be future projects. So I'm going to show you the just the setup and how you should go about at least starting your first shipyard. Some of you who are watching this are probably just starting out. Just a little precursor. It took me months to set up this shipyard, especially in areas at war when I was under constant fire. So, um, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be pretty hard, but some good first things is there is a stone turret, or if it's still in here, there it is, the steampunk cannon turret. This one fires either cannonballs. There's another gun in here as well that's a really cheap turret to kind of defend you going out. You have a couple of Gatling turrets and stuff like that. Just to keep in mind that for areas at war, you're constantly facing threats, and it's not until you get pretty much bigger that you actually start being able to defend yourself. So, first things first, the lifeblood of every base is going to be power. Now, this is a second generation power plant, so this power plant actually is producing a lot more energy than I need. So, just to kind of preface it, but it's also not realistic. The reason it's not realistic is because it's just a simple hydrogen setup, set up with a collector underneath, with these two oxygen generators, and then a bunch of hydrogen engines just feeding off of that. Now, each one of these engine sets is capable of producing about 20 megawatts, so this power plant produces about 40 megawatts, and those charge those main batteries here. Now, these are lithium batteries. These are batteries I have stolen from other builds that I've cannibalized to kind of make this progression. Now, power is going to be everything in industrial overhaul. That is going to be your biggest problem, along with production, because some of your basic machines take 5 megawatts at the minimum. So it's good to try and get power up and running as possible, and wind power is not enough. So it's a good first start, but it's not good enough to run the first basic machines. So you're going to definitely want to sort out power. Now, if you're using the mod that kills your hydrogen completely so that you obey the laws of thermodynamics, which I'm planning to introduce, but not until I've sorted that power plant and basically decommissioned it. The idea is going to be over on this side of the base is going to be a fuel refinery and then possibly a power plant that is going to feed not only the base but the future operations, because right here I want to be able to refine oil into materials that I'll need for the rest of the base. Now, first starting out, just make sure that you are keeping in mind power. And you're obviously, as a shipyard, you're going to want to be close to water, and in this case, water is a power source. There's also other wind turbines, other things that you can use. But when you're starting out, you're basically going to be using these two packs, which have been my first starter to in machines everywhere: a basic refinery and a assembly bench. But you're going to need more. Now, again, this is kind of the first kind of building I ever set up on a base. It's just a little assembly plant, just to kind of build basic materials. When you're setting up a base, you're going to want to make sure that you're close to a lot of materials, or as close as you can be. But the biggest one, if you can help it, is iron, since, well, that is pretty much the makeup of most of the ships. It takes a lot of steel and a lot of iron to make a ship. Not just in armor, but also in construction components and metal grids and stuff like that. Iron is your first basic raw material that you're going to need. The second basic is probably going to be copper. Now, those come in with stone and a few other base materials as well. Uh, this one here. So usually you get nickel, silicon, and iron, and then gravel when you're first kind of getting out of this basic refinery. And those can provide quite a few parts like steel, copper cables, and stuff like that. That's kind of important for the rest of the equipment in industrial overhaul. Now mine's a little bit different. I need more materials. You can see I have not just copper in here for copper wire, but rubber, and I'm going to have to worry about that soon. But you can see that you have to make more than one different type of cable and component. Certain machines require certain components. And starting out, that's going to be something you have to plan for in the future. And I unfortunately didn't, so I'm running into some production issues, which I'm hoping to start solving here soon. Now, the second thing you're going to probably want to focus on building once you get power and production kind of stabilized and you're in a pretty generally large area for you to expand is a pier. Now, this pier is actually pretty small, and this is the first pier I've ever really built. I'm trying to work on getting it a new upgrade. You can see some patches where it's taken some damage because, again, I get attacked quite a bit. Now, this pier is not intended to be big for a very big reason. It's because it's a fitting out pier. You need a place to store a vessel in order to continue to work on it. So the idea is that once the ship is complete enough that it'll float, you can float it out over to here and kind of get it operational. And then from there, you have an actual operating warship, or a cargo ship, or a barge, stuff like that. Now, when you're first starting out, you will need to also consider what you're going to be making next, like for how to ship build. Now, there are three kinds of ways that you can build ships. This first way was the original intended way that I started building ships, and is basically called a slipway. This allows you to build a ship on top of a platform that is slanted backwards, and then when the ship is ready, you knock out the blocks and the ship rolls into the water quite easily and floats pretty simply over to your pier. Now, this has been this entire first area of this base is literally the first setup I had for a shipyard. This is literally it from what's on screen right now. Now, there was a building over by this gas station which was torn down and turned into, well, a fuel station for vehicles. Now, it's a pretty decent, easy first setup, but the catch with the slipway is that you can only build ships on it. You can't repair them. This is a guaranteed building slot, if that makes sense. So you're going to have to get bigger, and eventually you're going to have to start considering a dry dock. Now, there's only really two types of dry docks in Space Engineers currently. In Space Engineers 2, there will be more than just two. This is in real retrospect, is what's known as a lifter dock. This dock will basically get underneath the ship and lift it out of the water. But it's not simulating that. It's simulating what's known as a graving dock, which allows water to be pumped out and the ship to be lowered onto keel blocks. That's what it's simulating. That's not what it is, but it is basically a lifter dock. Here's a smaller version that will probably be one of your first setups to build. It's pretty simple. It's basically just a large metal slab with a piston right here that you can turn basically on or off. And when you lower it, the ship goes in the water. When you raise it, the ship comes out of the water. Pretty simple, pretty basic. That one can both build and repair ships that are already in service. The easiest way to repair ships is to basically use these keel blocks with these little magnet plates on top. That's a good setup. And to build ships, you use the same setup, only take the magnet plates off and you build the ship on top of those. Then you cut them out when you're done. The next type of dry dock we have is the floating dry dock. Now, this is the one that you've seen quite a few episodes. You will need a separate dock to build it, unfortunately. to build a floating dry dock, you're going to need an actual dry dock. So it makes logical sense that your next build is probably going to be a graving dock. Now, there is some downsides to using a floating dry dock. To get this to work in Space Engineers, it is basically a large metal grid that sinks. It cannot float on its own. And if I go in here, you can kind of see how it works. It is literally just a bunch of propellers facing in the upper... Sorry, excuse me while that goes through that. It's just a bunch of propellers in the down position, basically pushing the dock up. That is literally it. It is intentionally designed to sink and not float. And then the propellers lift the ship out of the water when it's done. Now, it is quite fun and it is quite easy to use on some occasions. This one's in the description if you want to try and build it. It gets a little complicated, but it's pretty simple when it comes to dock standards. Now, there is some limitations to what you can do. It is a floating dry dock, which means that the heavier the ship, the harder it's going to be to lift it out of the water. So some tactics that I'd use to try and make sure that I can guarantee that my ships are going to float in the floating dry dock is to empty it as much as possible. Take all of the fuel out, take all of the ice, all of the food, the stores, the ammunition, make it as light as possible so that it's as easy of a job as possible to lift it out of the water. Sometimes I even go as far as to actually remove weapons and mounts completely. I've even gone as far as to remove a mast or two that was going to get overhauled and completely removed. So that's pretty basic for another dry dock that you can use. But there is another limitation as well, and it is the width of the dock. You can only fit ships that are the same width as the dry dock in it. And unfortunately, the other thing is, this can only repair ships. It cannot really build them. In theory, you could build a ship in here, but I've never had to because what I've used these dry docks for is a guaranteed repair slot, if that makes sense. I have a guaranteed build slot and I have guaranteed repair slots. So whenever a ship is damaged and I need a ship to be repaired, I know that I have the facilities to be able to take care of them. Other things you might want to consider when you're setting up docks is possibly cranes. I'm actually looking into possibly getting a crane for this dock here so I can start lifting some of these big heavy machinery into the ship. Other things you might want to consider is how you want to secure the dock. I have these big large plates on the inside here. See right here? That secures the dock once it's floated. I'm going to come out with a video that explains how to dry dock and how to maneuver and stuff like that, how to take care of your ships while they're in dry dock. This is just the first video that we're going to talk about it. Other things you might want to keep in mind is when you're building ships is, again, just your size and propulsion systems, how much power you want to produce. We'll get into ship design again in a later episode, but this is kind of just the basics of just getting started. So another thing that you might want to consider building will be, well, you need some place to park ships because unfortunately you can't park them in the dry dock forever. So this was one of the first piers I built. It's gotten a few modifications and some damage. There's going to be a retrofit of the pier here in the near future because I need to start installing shore power cables again. You have two types of piers, at least I've done two types of piers. You're not limited to what you can and can't build. This is a single level pier. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. You want to keep in mind that you want the pier to be as close to the ship as possible when it comes to quarterdecks and stuff like that so that you can easily transition onto the ship. Otherwise, you might want to start considering making brows. Other things to note is lighting is key. At night, it gets really hard to see these piers, and the last thing you want to do is actually hit them. I use these flat magnets as mooring clamps or mooring positions, and it actually has worked pretty well for me. I've not had many issues with it. The tide does go in and out with the water mods, so you might want to keep that in mind whenever you dock a ship, that it might sink as the tide comes in or tide comes out. Another type of pier is we have this double-decker pier. Now, this pier is, as such, a double-decker. It is mostly just for larger vessels that need a little bit extra room so that you can get up to their quarterdecks. This was designed for battleships and the aircraft carrier, but that was before I realized the aircraft carrier actually had a pretty slim quarterdeck, so not really that big a deal. These are larger, these take a lot longer to build, and a lot more resources. In fact, um, in emphasis of how long it took me to build piers, it's literally a scale. On the far left, it took me about 7 weeks to build, about 6 weeks to build this little pier here, and a little over 4 weeks to build the slipway. It took me another 5 weeks to build this pier. This one took me about 3 months, and then this one took me another 3 months. Now, the reason this one took me a lot longer is because it's a wider pier and it's a double decker, so you're putting in double the resources. So it's a good idea to have some construction vehicles. A good, uh, these are some basic construction vehicles. These are Wolverines that I've built. They're not very powerful. They're literally just a welder and a grinder. Not grinder, a welder and a digger. It's important to keep in mind that you are going to be doing a lot of that. If you're going to be doing a lot of welding, these concrete blocks are expensive. Now, if you can get around it, I've just now discovered a few other reasons. Like, these road blocks are actually pretty cheap and they're pretty large, so they might take up less room. I mean, they take up more room for less materials, which I might consider doing for all the rest of the piers. So that's a pretty decent idea. Um, Another thing you might want to consider building is a place to store all your ammunition. Space Engineers has a tendency to have things go boom if they are explosive. So a good place to store ammunition is a bunker, especially in areas at war. So I've stored all of my ammunition and machines that make ammunition in here, so that I'm not at risk of losing any vital materials. And as you can see, it's pretty far away from most things. I'm just trying my best to try and protect it as far as possible. What I need to do is actually dig this, well, pull all the machines out again and dig a little bit deeper into the mountain to make a proper bunker. Now, this area is just not really useful at the moment, but other ideas you might want to consider are dedicated buildings, uh, warehouses, machines that are, or factories or assembly plants, yards, storage, all that stuff. Shipyards take a lot of buildings to run, and my shipyard is a little bit lacking in buildings. And as for that, I'm suffering a little bit for it. And I'm trying to round turn that as soon as possible. So hopefully in the next couple logistics videos, I'll finally get my storage kind of sorted out and get my buildings back in order and start actually consider making things that work again. So I hope this was informative and I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. This is more of an informative, me talking to you, kind of explain how the things work. So this is just the basic how to set them up. I'm hoping that the next one's going to be about dry docking and how to dry dock, and what types of dry docks, how to build them, stuff like that. And the hopefully the one after that will probably be about ship design, because that's one of your big things too. To build a slipway or a dry dock, the first thing you have to think of is what kind of ship are you going to build first, and what should its requirements be, because the dock has to be bigger and it has to be kind of future proof. Like, what types of ships are you limited to building? Anyway, that's all for now. I hope this was informative and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know on what maybe you'd like to hear and cover in the next topic.